What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a morning show set expecting a normal interview, but instead finds himself face to face with a host who seems determined to make him look small? It only took 35 seconds of disrespect for the entire studio to realize they were watching something that would change morning television forever. Samuel L. Jackson sat down in the bright studio of Good Morning America that morning, expecting what he always got from these appearances: a friendly conversation, some laughs about his latest project, maybe a fun story or two from behind the scenes. What he got instead was something nobody could have predicted. Michael Strahan walked onto the set with his usual smile, but something felt different. The energy was off. Samuel could sense it immediately. He had been doing this for decades, and he knew when something wasn't right. "Samuel L. Jackson, welcome to the show," Michael said as he settled into his chair across from the actor. "Good to be here," Samuel replied with his trademark cool demeanor. "So let's get right into it," Michael started, and already his tone had an edge to it that Samuel picked up on. "Your new movie. A lot of people are saying it's just another action film. Same thing you've been doing for years. Do you ever get tired of playing the same character over and over?" Samuel's eyebrows raised slightly. It was a loaded question, the kind designed to make him defensive right out of the gate, but he stayed calm. "Well, I wouldn't say I play the same character," Samuel said evenly. "Each role has its own nuances, its own story. That's what makes acting interesting." Michael leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Come on, though. Tough guy with a gun. Isn't that basically your whole career at this point?" The studio crew exchanged glances. This wasn't the usual friendly banter of a morning show. Something was happening here. Samuel took a breath. "I think if you actually watch my films, you'd see there's a lot more depth than that. But I appreciate your very surface level analysis." "Surface level?" Michael's voice rose slightly. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You've made a fortune playing the exact same role for 30 years. And you've made a career asking softball questions and smiling at a camera," Samuel shot back, his voice still controlled, but with steel underneath. "We all have our lanes." The tension in the studio was thick now. The producers behind the cameras were frozen, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let this play out. Michael's smile faded completely. "That's pretty disrespectful for someone who came on my show." "Your show?" Samuel leaned forward. "This is Good Morning America. Last time I checked, there were other people's names on that title card, but maybe you've forgotten that." "I'm the one sitting in this chair conducting this interview," Michael said, his voice getting louder. "I'm the one who decides how this goes." Samuel shook his head slowly. "No. What you're doing is trying to embarrass me on national television for some reason I can't figure out. Did I do something to you? Because this feels personal." "It's not personal," Michael insisted, but his body language said otherwise. "I'm just asking the hard questions that other interviewers are too afraid to ask." "Hard questions?" Samuel let out a short laugh. "You're not asking hard questions. You're being insulting. There's a difference. A hard question would be about my craft, about the choices I make as an actor, about what drives me. What you're doing is just being rude." Michael stood up from his chair suddenly. "Maybe if you can't handle a real interview, you should stick to the talk shows that just kiss your feet the whole time." The crew gasped. This had gone completely off the rails. Samuel remained seated, looking up at Michael with an expression that somehow managed to be both calm and intimidating. "Sit down, Michael." "Don't tell me what to do," Michael snapped back. "I'm not telling you what to do," Samuel said quietly. "I'm suggesting that you take a second and think about what you're doing right now, because this isn't going the way you think it is." Michael sat back down, but the hostility was still radiating off him. "Let's talk about your personal life, then." "Let's not," Samuel said firmly. "Why? Got something to hide?" "No, I've got something called boundaries," Samuel replied. "Something you clearly don't understand." Michael shuffled his papers aggressively. You know what? I've interviewed hundreds of people, thousands, and most of them have the decency to show some respect when they're a guest on this show. Samuel's jaw tightened. Respect goes both ways. You've been disrespectful from the moment I sat down. I came here to talk about my work, not to be attacked. Attacked? Michael laughed, but it was harsh. You think this is an attack? I'm just having a conversation. This isn't a conversation, Samuel said, his voice rising for the first time. A conversation involves two people listening to each other. You're not listening. You're just waiting for your turn to take another shot. Maybe I wouldn't take shots if you gave more interesting answers, Michael said coldly. The crew was now openly uncomfortable. One of the producers made a cutting motion with her hand, signaling to wrap it up, but Michael ignored her. Interesting answers, Samuel repeated slowly. You want interesting? Here's something interesting. I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've worked with the best directors, the best actors, won awards, broken records. And in all that time, across hundreds of interviews, I have never, and I mean never, been treated with such blatant disrespect as I'm being treated right now. Michael opened his mouth to respond, but Samuel held up a hand. I'm not finished, Samuel said, his voice low and controlled, which somehow made it more powerful. You invited me here. I cleared my schedule. I came to your studio. I sat in your chair. And from the moment this interview started, you've done nothing but try to diminish me. Why? What's the point? I'm not trying to diminish you, Michael said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. I'm trying to have a real conversation. No, you're not, Samuel countered. You're trying to make yourself look big by making me look small. And it's not working. It's just making you look petty. Michael's face reddened. You're calling me petty? On my own show? I'm calling you what you're being, Samuel said simply. And honestly, I'm disappointed. I expected better from you. Everyone talks about how great you are, how professional. But this is amateur hour. Get out, Michael said suddenly, his voice sharp. Samuel blinked. Excuse me? You heard me. Get out of my studio. The crew stood frozen in shock. Nobody moved. Samuel sat perfectly still for a moment, processing what had just been said. Then slowly, deliberately, he stood up from his chair. He removed the microphone clipped to his jacket with careful, measured movements. You know what's sad about this? Samuel said quietly, placing the microphone on his chair. You had a chance to have a real conversation with me, to ask about my journey, my experiences, what I've learned. Instead, you chose to be hostile for no reason. That's on you. I said get out, Michael repeated, but his voice was shaking now. I'm leaving, Samuel said calmly, but not because you told me to. I'm leaving because I have too much respect for myself to sit here and be treated like this. I don't care how big your show is or how famous you think you are. Nobody gets to talk to me like that. Michael stood up again, his face flushed. You think you're too good for this show? I think I deserve basic respect, Samuel replied, and apparently that's too much to ask from you. You're making a big mistake walking out of here, Michael said, his voice rising again. Do you know how many people would kill to be on this show? Samuel turned back to face him fully. Then get one of them, because I'm done. You're going to regret this, Michael called out as Samuel started walking toward the exit. You're going to look like a diva. Everyone's going to see you walking out. Samuel stopped and turned around one more time. Let them see. I'd rather look like a diva than sit here and let someone disrespect me on television. I've earned the right to walk away from situations that don't serve me. And this definitely doesn't serve me. Fine, Michael shouted, his composure completely gone now. Go. We don't need you anyway. Clearly you did, Samuel said quietly. Or you wouldn't have booked me. The words hung in the air like smoke. The crew members had their heads down, pretending to be busy with equipment, trying not to make eye contact with anyone. Michael pointed toward the door. "Just leave. Get out of here." "I'm going," Samuel said, and his voice was steady as a rock. "But before I do, let me say this for everyone watching. This is not how you treat people. I don't care if you're having a bad day. I don't care if you're trying to make some kind of point. When someone comes on your show, you treat them with dignity. You treat them like a human being. What happened here today was the opposite of that." "Are you seriously lecturing me right now?" Michael's voice cracked slightly. "Yes, I am," Samuel said firmly. "Because somebody needs to. You're better than this, Michael. Or at least, I thought you were." With that, Samuel L. Jackson turned and walked toward the studio exit. His stride was purposeful, dignified. He didn't storm off in anger. He didn't slam anything or yell. He simply walked away with his head held high. Behind him, Michael stood in the middle of the set, surrounded by cameras and crew members who couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. His face was a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and something else. Something that looked almost like regret. "Well," Michael said to the silent studio, trying to regain some composure. That was unexpected." Nobody responded. The cameramen kept their eyes on their equipment. The producers were already on their phones. The other hosts who had been watching from the side looked horrified. Michael sat back down in his chair, slowly, as if his legs might give out. "We're going to commercial," he said weakly to no one in particular. One of the producers finally spoke up. "We've been off air for the last 3 minutes. The feed cut when things got heated." Michael looked up sharply. "What?" "We went to commercial break," the producer explained, her voice shaking. "Nobody saw most of that." But that wasn't entirely true. The studio audience had seen everything. The crew had seen everything. And word was already starting to spread through the building about what had just happened. Samuel L. Jackson had walked out. He'd been kicked off Good Morning America. Or had he quit? Nobody was quite sure how to describe it, but everyone agreed on one thing. They had never seen anything like it. Michael sat in his chair, the bright studio lights beating down on him. The makeup on his face felt heavy. His collar felt too tight. Everything felt wrong. Should we address it when we come back?" another producer asked tentatively. "Address what?" Michael snapped. "Nothing happened. He had to leave. Schedule conflict." The producer nodded, but didn't look convinced. Nobody looked convinced. Samuel, meanwhile, had made it to his dressing room. He grabbed his jacket and his phone. His publicist was already calling, having heard something went wrong. He'd deal with that later. Right now, he just wanted to leave the building with the same dignity he'd maintained throughout that entire disaster of an interview. Back on set, Michael was trying to pull himself together. "Okay," he said to his team. "We go back in 2 minutes. We're doing the cooking segment next. Nobody mentions what just happened." But his hands were shaking as he shuffled his note cards. His confident smile was gone. For the first time in his career as a television host, Michael Strahan looked rattled. The stage manager counted down. 5, 4, 3, 2. "Welcome back to Good Morning America," Michael said into the camera, and his voice was almost normal. Almost. "Coming up next, we've got a fantastic recipe for autumn soup that you're going to love." But the energy was gone. The natural charisma that made Michael such a successful host had evaporated. He was going through the motions, reading the prompter, hitting his marks. But anyone watching closely could see it. Something had broken. In the dressing room, Samuel L. Jackson put on his jacket and took one last look around. He'd been on hundreds of sets like this. Thousands of interviews. He'd faced down action villains and dramatic scenes that required every ounce of his talent. But walking away from that interview had been one of the hardest things he'd done. Not because he regretted it. He didn't. Not for a second. But because it was disappointing. He'd gone in with an open mind, ready to have fun, ready to promote his work and connect with the audience. Instead, he'd been met with hostility from the first question. He thought about going back out there, thought about confronting Michael again, trying to understand what had really been going on. But no, that wouldn't accomplish anything. Some situations you just had to walk away from. His phone buzzed again. More calls, more texts. The word was spreading fast. Samuel took a deep breath and headed for the exit. As he walked through the backstage corridors, crew members averted their eyes. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked shocked. One young production assistant caught his eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry." He nodded at her. The security guard at the back entrance held the door open for him. "Mr. Jackson," he said quietly, "for what it's worth, you handled that with real class." Samuel paused and looked at the guard. "Thank you. I appreciate that." "I've been working here for 15 years, the guard continued. "Never seen anything like what just happened in there. But you kept your cool. That was impressive." "Sometimes keeping your cool is the strongest thing you can do," Samuel said. He stepped out into the bright morning sun. The city noise hit him immediately. Car horns, people talking, construction somewhere nearby. Normal life, continuing on as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something significant. Back inside the studio, the show continued. Michael moved from segment to segment. He interviewed a chef. He did a bit about holiday shopping. He read the news headlines. But everyone in that studio knew that none of it mattered. The only thing anyone would remember from this show was what had happened in those heated minutes with Samuel L. Jackson. During a commercial break, Michael's co-host approached him carefully. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," Michael said curtly. That was intense." "It was nothing," Michael insisted. He was being difficult. "I had to make a call." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Samuel hadn't been difficult. He'd been defending himself against questions and comments that had crossed a line. Michael knew it. Everyone knew it. The show wrapped up its final segments. Michael said his goodbyes to the camera with his signature smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. As soon as the cameras cut, he stood up and left the set without a word to anyone. In his office, he sat down heavily in his chair. His phone was blowing up too. Producers, network executives, publicists. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. Everyone had an opinion about what should happen next. Michael stared at his desk, at the awards and photos that decorated his office. Pictures of him with celebrities, with athletes, with presidents. Years of successful interviews. Years of being known as the friendly, charismatic host who could make anyone feel comfortable. And in one morning, he'd thrown all of that into question. He thought about Samuel's words. "You're better than this, Michael. Or at least I thought you were." Were those words going to haunt him? Probably. Should they? Definitely. Meanwhile, Samuel L. Jackson was in a car heading back to his hotel. He looked out the window at the city passing by. He thought about the young actors who would hear about what happened today. He hoped they'd learn something from it. That it's okay to stand up for yourself. That respect isn't negotiable. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. His phone rang again. This time he answered. "Yeah, I'm okay," he said to whoever was on the other end. "No, I don't regret it. Not even a little bit." Because he didn't. Samuel L. Jackson had walked onto that set as one of the most respected actors in Hollywood. And he'd walked off the set with that respect intact. The same couldn't be said for everyone involved. Back at the studio, the crew was already talking about what they'd witnessed. The story was spreading through the building, then beyond. By lunchtime, people across the industry would know. By evening, it would be everywhere. The interview that never finished. The confrontation that spiraled. The moment when one of Hollywood's biggest stars looked a television host in the eye and said no more. Michael Strahan sat in his office. knowing that his phone would keep ringing, knowing that he'd have to answer questions about what happened, knowing that he'd have to face the consequences of how he'd conducted that interview. But right now, in this moment, all he could think about was Samuel's calm, measured voice saying, "I have too. Much respect for myself to sit here and be treated like this." And for the first time since the interview had ended, Michael wondered if maybe, just maybe, he should have shown Samuel that same respect from the beginning. But it was too late for that now. The damage was done. The moment had passed. And everyone who'd been in that studio that morning knew they'd witnessed something that would be talked about for years to come. Not because of what was said about movies, or careers, or celebrity, but because of what was said about respect, dignity, and knowing when to walk away.